Good insight.
And you mentioned before when you were talking about Fred Hoyle how he was an open atheist, and it seemed like,
Yeah,
at least in the story that you told, it seemed like that his religion, in a sense, dictated the science he did, or at least he tried to kind of justify, and maybe in the back of his mind, in his personal life,
yeah,
try to justify the science he was doing with his religion or a lack of
yeah.
religion. And so I was kind of wondering this. Feel like we've mentioned Galileo a few times, but there's a quote from him that goes, "The Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens
Yeah.
go." And I'm sure maybe you've heard that before. And I was
Yes.
wondering um, how like do should scientists bring their religion into their quote unquote scientific lab? Like in your case, that may be an observatory, or that may be working in your Python Jupyter notebook with the data. Is there a room for religion in the science lab, or how do
Yeah.
you separate
So
the two?
I so first of all, the quote which you is actually not from Galileo. It's
Uh,
actually from Cardinal Bellarmino,
okay.
who was a contemporary of Galileo and was a Jesuit priest who was involved in the trials of Galileo and was trying to help Galileo a lot to save him from. Galileo had a lot of enemies. He never made friends. And he had a way of exciting enemies, latching on. His most famous fights with the Jesuits were about who discovered the moons of Jupiter first, and citations about who discovered sunspots first. But that's another story. But I find it difficult. So when I enter the lab, when I enter my lab space, being like working with data, I have to admit religion often never enters in. It shapes my view, but it never enters in explicitly. Maybe often what does happen, I kind of I kind of in hindsight reflect about it, and about, but I in the moment it's about a problem at hand, and it's like my full mental powers are trying to solve that particular problem. So religion doesn't enter too much for me personally in the day-to-day problems at hand. It shapes my views, I have to admit. And I think it shapes everyone's views. Nobody comes into science with a clean slate. Everybody comes in with an ideology. We talked about Fred Hoyle. We can talk about many others who entered the sciences to improving people's situations. People who had. I basically know people, many biologists who entered into the sciences because some of their relatives had diseases which are uncurable, and they were like, I need to find that cure. There's so many of these exigencies which enter into our motivations for doing sciences. There could be so many of them. And there's some of us, and there's always the fun in doing science, no doubt about that, and discovering something new. But a lot of our science is never a clean slate. We always come with our baggage into the sciences, unfortunately, but that is how it is.
One of the things,
Um, Go ahead.
thank you. One of the things that I've always found really fascinating about the relationship between astronomy and God, is that every time that someone seems to make a discovery, and that would somehow implicate God or not, we seem to be pushing back where God is hiding in the heavens. So back in the days when our understanding of space was limited to a couple of stars and our sun, people
Mm-hmm.
seem to think that God was right there. And so maybe, I assume that scientists back then would have thought, oh, if there is room for a God, then he would be doing all of these things. And now that we understand the universe a lot better than we used to, and we understand how things move and things like that, it seems that, oh, if God is somewhere doing something, it's through the Big Bang, or in different universes, or he exists somewhere radically different. And so the influence of God never really seems to be coming into the science that people are doing. I don't know if that's a correct analysis on my part. Well, what do you think about something like that?
So I don't think it's in that form. I think that's a very naive way of looking at it. So God is both, the concept, religions consider God as both transcendent, that's what you mean, out there, and they're trying to push that quantity out, but he's also immanent. So that's both, all religions talk about the transcendence of God and the immanence of God.
Right.
It's a concept which is both, it's neither here nor there, right? So yeah. And I think it's it's very simplistic to talk about location, right?
Right.
And that would be like, I like to point out, like, that's like a 5-year-old talking about God. But unfortunately, most people think about religion, they learn it till they are 5 or 6 years old, and it's that steady state, which they don't really grow in the knowledge of what religion. It's a very simplistic understanding of religion, but it's both so transcendence as well as immanence, and it depends on what you focus. And transcendence is not a physical location.
Yeah.
And that's what we also need to understand. It's not a physical location. Right? I mean, for people who, this very simplistic understanding of, the more you improve in science, the more you're displacing God, is too simplistic. It's not what religions teach. And I would say this partly for all religions. They do not talk about God as a vocation. I think that's the best kind of response I could.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And in philosophy, there's often philosophers come up with the physical universe and the spiritual universe, and they kind of, at least nowadays, they're trying to explain, for example, in consciousness, can we explain everything with science? And so, what are kind of your views as to, what are the limitations of science, and how far can we bring science to explain everything around us?
So that's an interesting set of words you use. Science to explain everything around us. That's like a theory of everything. That's always been the wish of science.
Mm-hmm. Is there an aspect to the universe that we live in that we just can't, that's not tangible with science?
I like to put it this way. Let's start with our own human experience. Our human experience is very complicated. And science is very young. Let's be frank. In the scheme of things, science is very young, right? So we are discovering things by leaps and bounds, and things are changing, but science is very young. There are many things in science which we know very well, like the laws of physics, the laws in chemistry. Biology, things are becoming a bit wishy-washy already. We have many unknowns. We think we know a lot, but still we are discovering a lot more. Then with more complicated systems, things get very complicated. Think of the environment. It's like a multi-dimensional, even in astronomy, we know very little, to be honest. Let's be frank about this, right? So, but then there's this full aspect of many aspects of human dimension, relationships, how a society behaves, which science has no answers yet. I'm not saying it will never have an answer, but it has no answers yet. It has been in the past that there's something which Gadamer complained about, is that when we talk about, so everything is a science today, right? We talk about the human sciences, we talk about the social sciences, and we talk about the physical sciences. But but there was because the physical sciences were so very successful, he felt that the social sciences and the human sciences were actually trying to copy the physical sciences in terms of their methodology. But it's a very the methodology of the sciences is very restrictive. It puts you in a straight box, and oftentimes to understand a lot of things, especially in the human experiences, human way of dimension. I mean, right now we have had this right now I'm in Italy, and the government has just collapsed. And you try to understand the Italian mentality. They've had so many governments in the last 20 years that you would reach already at a level of two governments every 2 years, and you try to understand this and the dynamics of this, and the dynamics of relationships, and science doesn't have answers yet. It's too restrictive. And now I don't know whether that's only a question of the methodology or maybe it's a matter of time. But right now, there are many questions which science cannot answer. I'd like to also point out that there are other ways of knowing things that we have developed, humans have developed over time, many ways of studying academically the human experience, the wealth of human experiences. Unfortunately, many scientists try to negate those other dimensions of human experience, or other ways of knowing. But they have something to teach us also.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this podcast episode. This is Michael.
This is Sam.
This is Tommy.
And this is Joe.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to leave a review. All of the show notes can be found either in the description below or on our website. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next week with more Everything Astronomy.